I think the best animators, like the most effective animators, are the ones that are.
What advice would you give students coming right out of school that are trying to get a job?
How do you make a shot entertaining? I think there's a way to go about this, which is.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to How to Become an Animator. I'm Sir Wade, and today we are joined by Simon Otto, which I will let him do his own introduction.
Thank you very much for having me. Simon Otto. I was the head of character animation on all three How to Train Your Dragon movies. I've been an animator at DreamWorks for 21 years. Started out as a 2D animator, and I'm now a freelance director.
Fancy.
Sounds fancy. Yeah.
So 21 years starting with 2D, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started as a traditional animator on The Prince of Egypt. I was hired out of an animation school in Paris called Les Gobelins, from which a lot of really great animators came, and I was really lucky to get in. Even though I'm not French, I came from Switzerland. And and it was this sort of dream come true to come to the US and be an animator in one of the big studios.
How was being an international applicant and then getting in? Like, was that as big of a thing as it is now, or how did that work for you?
You mean at DreamWorks or in Paris?
Coming from Paris to the US to work.
I think, well, I was really lucky because at that time DreamWorks was just starting up and they had started working on The Prince of Egypt, and now they were really, I think they did their first day, it was like when they were just finishing their first few sequences, and now it's really about getting the movie done. So for a year, they had like a year and a half left, and they needed people. And because Christophe Serran and Rodolphe Guénodin and a lot of the other French animators and animators who came from Amblin in London, and they had already hired some Disney animators, they just needed to staff up, another 10, 15 people, if not more. And I just happened to graduate from that school at that time, along with Fabrice Joubert and Alex Puvilland. They're two my classmates, and we all three of us got hired to work here on The Prince of Egypt.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a really lucky moment in time, because then, the gates opened and closed again. Visas were hard to get, hard to come by. Like, we've just gone through a drought where it's really difficult to get people to come to the United States. There's a lot of talent in Europe that can't make the jump, and I just happened to be ready at a time when an exciting studio was opening up. They were trying to do something different, and I happened to just be one of those kids that were ready to make the jump and be thrown into the deep end. It was quite an experience, but it was an absolute dream come true.
Awesome. What kept you there so long?
I mean, that's pretty simple. I just steadily, from project to project, was able and allowed to do something that was more interesting than what I did before. And of course, it's a great job. For the first 15 years or so, with exceptions, of course, but the core team of animators were always the same people. You had James Bax, you had Christophe Serran, you had Jakob Jensen, you had people like that who were there all the time. And so we were a group of people who were going from movie to movie, and it seemed like the studio was building towards something. For me, it went from being a sort of junior animator to being a senior animator to becoming a supervising animator very quickly. And then, 12 years ago, I was offered to be the head of character animation on the first How to Train Your Dragon. And that was obviously an opportunity I couldn't turn down. And luckily, I did it, and luckily it happened on that franchise. And of course, from that moment on, How to Train Your Dragon became my baby too. I know there's a lot of people who feel ownership over this franchise, but for me, I felt the personal investment in this, and working alongside Dean DeBlois and Bonnie Arnold and all the people who worked on it, like Nico Marley and Pierre-Olivier Vincent. Like, we created a little team. We were a little team of people who loved working together, and we felt that we were doing something that wasn't, your run-of-the-mill animated movie. And with every movie, the ambition sort of continued to grow. until now we've sort of finally came to the end of it, where we feel very accomplished. I feel very accomplished for having worked on these movies and having done something that I don't think is out there like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any highlights aside from the animation and the actual work, like for you throughout that process? Are there any moments for you personally that stand out over that time?
I mean, when the first movie came out, actually, I remember, I think one of the biggest moment on the first movie was when I was invited to like one of the first test screenings where the film wasn't finished, and we had just put in a boarded version of the ending where Hiccup loses his leg, and spoiler alert, where Hiccup loses his leg, and he basically is now an equal part to Toothless. You know, they're both kind of incomplete characters and have to coexist together and become this mutual symbiosis. And seeing that preview screening and watching it with a real audience for the first time, I gave me chills, you know. And then I think there's a series of highlights. You're seeing the movie for the first time with John Powell's score, or hearing John Powell's score. I remember hearing it. We got like a CD or something where we could hear it, and that we were blown away by that. So things came together, and along the way there were always these moments where we felt like, wow, that scene or that moment really came together, and it culminated with on this third movie, the sequence, which was the first sequence we animated, which we called First Date, which is the scene on the beach when this weird, surreal mating dance sequence takes place, where Hiccup is essentially Cyrano de Bergerac, who tells Toothless how to, you know, sort of seduce his you know, wife to be. And that's a highlight for animators, because it's entirely dialogue free, and you have to tell the story through the right camera, the right shot, but mostly pantomime.
Yeah. About that sequence specifically, since we won't spoil any of the movie here, you have to watch it. But for that sequence, it's a lot of it. Some of it's in the trailer, so we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
What went into like those choices? There's like a lot of really funny moments.
Yeah, it's I mean, like every scene, every sequence, every moment is a work in progress, and you kind of find your way to to a point where now you're satisfied with the scene. And it's really hard to know when that moment is sometimes, because we nudged that scene around so many times, and even in its current form, there were voices that said, yeah, lose this shot, add another shot, trim it down, it's too long, whatever, add a line of dialogue, until you put it in front of an audience and you know it plays, which is when all the voices go away generally. But the way we went about the scene is, obviously it starts with Dean's script, and it was always the centerpiece of the movie. There was a moment in the movie that Dean deliberately designed around music, no dialogue, and it was going to be always going to be a companion piece to Forbidden Friendship in the first movie, when Hiccup goes down to the beach and essentially approaches Toothless for the first time. This was going to be the companion piece, but in this case, what was different is it's between two dragons, and Hiccup was an onlooker, essentially. So the way we approached it, obviously Dean wrote the script, wrote multiple drafts. There were at one point Hiccup and Astrid were watching it unfold, and I think it's when the decision was made for Hiccup to do it by himself, finally you were able to entirely focus on the interaction between the two dragons, and you weren't so distracted with the dialogue between Hiccup and Astrid, because they had essentially a different perspective on it. You know, Astrid was all for it, and Hiccup was hesitant, right, in the first iteration. And so this change was really important, and we had boarded older versions, different versions. I know Tron Mai, the head of story, boarded some versions, and eventually the version that is in the movie was handed to a storyboard artist called Bolem Bushiba, who's been a board artist on Dragons 2 as well, and an important part of our team. And with some of the boards of Tron and Bolem's amazing ideas of how this could unfold, he found a lot of fun ideas, like the whole idea that Toothless just kind of turns into a helicopter and sprays sand into the Light Fury's face, or there's a moment where you concede the scene now that you know you're going in the right direction, and you keep adding to it or taken away. And of course in editorial it takes a turn, and music gets added to it, that changes it again. So that scene was moved around quite a bit, and then from there it went into previs, and previs had Camera basically had their own ideas about how the scene should play, which was we want to feel the moment when finally it works, and that's when the camera becomes much more fluid and alive. And if you watch the sequence again, you know that moment is when Toothless starts drawing. When Toothless stops listening to Hiccup and he starts listening to himself. Everything else up to that is fairly static in terms of camera, with a few exceptions. But you feel that change. So that then had to, and then of course the location also kind of restaged the scene. There's a lot of things that you think, oh, you got it in storyboards, but no, then once you put it in the actual set and with the camera language that where you start thinking about camera movement as well, and lens choices and things like that. And then of course lighting and all that comes later, but that's when the moment where we took the scene, and now it was about telling the story scene by scene through pantomime, so the audience understands. And essentially how you approach this is every scene has an inner dialogue, like the character says something to the other character, and Toothless might say, oh, don't look up there, you haven't seen anything. There's a moment where she hears that Hiccup's up there, and she turns around and can't see him, and then she looks back to Toothless, and Toothless kind of sort of embarrassingly looks back. So we then really with a few animators blocked out the entire scene, and that's generally how we approach those scenes, which is a little different from dialogue scenes. We knew that this scene was going to be a tricky scene to animate, and we really wanted to throw the top talent at the scene as well, at the sequence. And so what we did is we did the same thing for Forbidden Friendship in the first movie. We kind of approached it so that we started basically blocking the entire sequence, with a few exceptions. Some shots we knew, okay, this is going to be fine, we know how to do this. And we were maybe 4 or 5 animators who blocked the entire sequence through once. And through that process, we actually restaged some scenes, we added some shots, we argued for, kind of fleshing out certain moments. And we progressed the scene forward and sent it up to editorial. They looked at it in editorial, changed the sound effects. There was a lot of back and forth. But it was the first sequence we animated, along with the scene leading into the sequence, which is where the Light Fury leads Toothless out of the village. But basically that scene was then sort of in its blocking form. Some shots had 3 poses, others had 20, 25 poses. We kind of animated the scene through, and then started polishing it up and even distributing some shots to newer animators that just came onto the show and say, hey, can you take this and finish it up? Which is not something we generally do. We generally have an animator block a scene and finish a scene. But in this particular case, because it was such a gem and so important to the movie, we wanted to take the best possible approach, whatever it takes, to make this scene magical.
Was it like that also on Forbidden Friendship? Like it was similarly blocked all the way through? And
yeah, we did. We actually, that scene was we were already a good 6 to 8 months into production, and we saw it caused a pretty big challenge for us, because when we saw Chris Sanders and I think Alessandro and Tron boarded on that scene as well, but mostly Chris Sanders' boards, we looked at his boards and we was like, there's no way we can do this with this character. Like, this character's not designed to be an upright sitting, googly-eyed character. And then we said, well, why don't we challenge ourselves? And the way we did that was to saying, okay, let's take the sequence out of the production schedule and the pressure of getting it done, and we just throw in 1 or 2 poses per shot. and just design Toothless with the charm that Chris Sanders Boards had and our own ideas of this character, and let's just basically do a storyboard version of the sequence. And in that process, we added shots, we extended moments, and I think the scene from layout to and through animation to final animation, the scene grew by like 30 to 40 seconds.
Wow.
So significantly longer. And we had the support of Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois and the producers, and we just went for it. And when we showed it for the first time, everybody was really surprised and blown away how charming Toothless can really be. And that kind of that was probably the key moment for the success of the first movie. It was doing that sequence like this and allowing us to really explore the interaction between Toothless and Hiccup, and how Hiccup falls in love with this beast, and through that how we, the audience, fall in love with Toothless, which I think has now been proven. You know, seeing Toothless out there for 10 years with fans, like Toothless is an incredibly powerful character. Like there's a fan base out there and an audience out there that really loves Toothless, and it is because, and we're obviously conscious about that, that people love Toothless because they see their own relationship with their pets in it. It's a very sort of deep emotional connection that we have to our animals, and Toothless represents that. It's my intellectual analysis of probably something that's not as intellectual. You know.
The design of Toothless is pretty significantly different between the first and later movies. At least when you look at like promos on the box art and stuff. Is that like in part? It sounds like this might have been because of that sequence. Like he's definitely more mean looking in the first movie, smaller eyes and like wider and much more pet like later.
I mean, the first movie really dealt with that, right? You had to tell. The idea of Toothless was it's a night fury, a dragon that hunts at night, nobody's ever seen. It's the most fierce, the most dangerous dragon there is. And our little ill-equipped, gangly, runt-of-the-litter Hiccup befriends the worst enemy, essentially. And we, as the audience, have to understand that this character has this face, but it also has that face. And that he truly believes, through compassion with this injured animal, that they're not bad. It's just our idea. So that's part of it. And that process, the sequence that I just described, is what brought us to that other side of Toothless. And even though we didn't quite know when we designed Toothless that he was going to have that kind of range, is what then proved to us that Toothless can also be really cuddly, cute, fuzzy, mammalian kind of creature. And so I think it's that, and then obviously once the audience knows that character's in there, Toothless became a little bit more that character. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that we, through making one movie, understood what makes Toothless appealing and how Toothless is appealing even when he's fierce and dangerous. And in the first movie, there's a lot of scenes that were done where we didn't know exactly what his, Showtime angle was. Like Toothless is a really tricky character. Like if you go 3/4 back, he looks like a weird sort of deformed thing. If you have certain upshots or side, like we know Toothless doesn't always look great. That's the downside of a complex design. Like if you take Mickey Mouse, even though Mickey Mouse is a complex design, it's essentially a ball. Any angle you look at it, it's a ball. But when you have a shape that's so complex as Toothless' head, sometimes there's certain angles that it just doesn't look like what you expect. That's always a trick with. That's a trick with certain kinds of designs.
And for all the other dragons, for all the movies, like what was the process like of picking and choosing, like behaviors, traits, personalities, like how you're finding reference, like what was all of that like for all these years?
We very quickly developed a couple of rules for ourselves, which was the initial goal was to not only create a dragon universe that's just basically based on the dragon ideas that we have from growing up, from seeing Sleeping Beauty and visual effects movies, and like there's a certain style of dragons that you'd expect that maybe 15 years ago, if you had asked a kid to draw a dragon, that's what it would have looked like. I think that's changed because of dragons, because of our movies. But it's basically what we did is we wanted to create a universe of species that we all know. Okay, this could be a dragon. That could be. We want to have a chubby one, and we want to have one that's long, snake-like. We want to have the classic dragon. We want to have a dragon that the world has never seen. And so very quickly we realized, okay, we basically created an animal kingdom, a new animal kingdom of animals with wings that you could qualify as dragons. And the way we went about this is because Toothless from the beginning, and also of course a lot of Nico Marley's early designs kind of resembled certain animals, like the Gronkel meat lug is basically a crocodile mixed with a bulldog. And you go like, okay, well that makes sense. Now that you say it, bulldog shaped crocodile with wings. You go like, that makes a lot of sense. And then you go, well, what's Toothless? And then the Toothless that Chris and Dean wrote that we had to design from scratch once Chris and Dean came on to the movie, because the first 2 years there were other directors working on the film. They said it should be, actually I should back up. The story there is that they went around from story artist to story artist as they were boarding some early sequences, and one of the story artists, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but had a screensaver of a Black Panther on his computer, and the directors went, it's like that. I mean, it's a creature that I want to touch, but I also know it's going to bite my hand off. Plus, it's black. You only see its eyes. It would not be visible in the night. It should be something like this. And there had been a lot of design drawings around Toothless, and that's when I started doing a lot of drawings myself as well, of what I think Toothless could look like, along with Nico and Gabe Hordos, who was the supervising animator of the first movie. We kind of together came up with what Toothless eventually looked like. And then through animating this character, we modified him, into a more appealing, cute character. But what I'm saying is basically every dragon is a mix and match of existing animals, at least as inspirations. Mm-hmm. And I called it sort of the salad mixing bowl of dragons, where you throw in a number of ingredients, and we would go to the point where we shoot, like we would collect references and just create playlists of Toothless being the mixture of a Black Panther, a small bird of prey, a bat, and a salamander. And you create a playlist, and you enter sort of combine these different videos, and you look at it and you go like, yeah, I can see that if you create some kind of a mixture of these ingredients, there's a creature there that I can recognize. And that set us off on every dragon is basically inspired by a small number of animals or things. Like we also started throwing in, Skull Crusher is a battle axe mixed with a truffle pig mixed with a rhinoceros and a scarab beetle. Mm-hmm. And you go like, that makes perfect sense. You look at that character now, and it's pretty clear that's where the inspirations are from. So that's kind of how we went about it.
That's funny. A battle axe.
Yeah. Yeah, because his front looks like an axe,
Yeah. Huh. Did that factor into like any decisions? Like, well, a battle axe would chop like this, so he needs to.
Yeah, and definitely. I mean, it was sort of a rhinoceros who would ram things, right? So, but with the front of a battle axe, and that made it really entertaining for us. And I think it's ultimately also what makes these characters appealing and entertaining, because there's an idea behind every character, a very clear caricature, which I think is something really important in animation. It's how do you create something that is not just randomly invented, but that is recognizable and entertaining. I always compare it to there's something magical when a stand-up comedian goes up on stage, looks nothing like, Trump or George W. Bush or somebody who's easily caricatured, and they do a few things that make us immediately recognize that character that's being caricatured. That's magic. I think that's something that is very powerful and kind of touches us in our guts. It makes us laugh. So that's something I always look out for, whether it's a human performance or an animal performance. It's like find the caricature, even if it's dramatic or realistic. Like you have to find something that is relatable and that you can connect with, even if it's an object, And everything has character. Everything you look around, everything is character. You can take two types of bottles and they have different characters. So I think that's really essentially an animator's talent. There's understanding naturalism, mechanics, locomotion, and the principles of animation. All of that is really important, but you have to get to a point where that's second nature and you're doing it as you're animating. And what you're really focused on is what makes the scene something that somebody would want to watch over and over, not just once, and say, oh yeah, that was really believable. Oh, that I believed in the reality of this thing. It's like what makes it fun and entertaining and dramatic. What's the caricature of it? That's, I think, what sets animation apart from visual effects, for example, or just making a straight documentary of something. This is really what it's all about.
So actually, one question I wanted to back up to is, you progressed career-wise and stuff, and then you ended up as the Hoka, or head of character animation. What does that mean? What are the roles?
What's the job?
Yeah, what's the job?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot because it sounds a little bit like, I hate the title because it sounds a little bit like you're an executive and you're in charge of character animation, and it really isn't. I mean, there's of course there's studio level discussions about hiring and what sort of software you might want to use, but I look at it as more like it's really a creative job, and it's a job that, depending on who does it, varies a little bit. Because I'm a 2D animator at the core, I storyboard on movies. I do some design work. I do a lot of translating from 2D to 3D and help the process along. But essentially, the way my job has two parts. The first part is building the digital puppet, or being more precisely being the client of all those who build these digital puppets for us, the drivers, if you look at it like that. So if making a character is making a car, then I'm the driver who has to tell everybody who's working in this process, I'd love to have 6 gears, and I need to have an automatic roof, and I need super boosters, whatever. And I ask for a lot of things that they can go, okay, we can't do that. It's going to cost too much. Your Ferrari needs to be a Toyota. So there's that conversation. There's a lot of conversations around what's feasible, what you want it to look like. And of course, it has a lot to do with appeal and design. If Nico Marley has designed fish legs a certain way, you want to make sure that the digital puppet, even though it's a 3D, thing now, you have to make sure that it represents the idea that was at the core of the design, and that you can do all those expressions. So during, I'd say 15 to 18 months, I work with the designers, the modelers, the riggers, and even a little bit with the surfacing team on what these characters will eventually look like. And that can go down to the thickness of the lid, because when the lid gets lit a certain way, I have a shadow in the eye, in the eyeball, and now my pupil looks smaller when it gets lit, and it doesn't have the same appeal. We've had so many conversations about stuff like that, but essentially it's building the rigs with the people. I mean, I don't know how to build a rig, but I work with Kevin Oakes in this case, who's the head of rigging, in what I'd like to have as an animator. And I say that of course, then very quickly you have supervising animators who then take charge of a character, and then they work closely with a rigger or a character TD who works on that specific character. So that's the first half. And then as soon as we have these digital puppets up and running, of course, part of that work is what I talked about earlier, which is how do you make these characters entertaining? How do they behave? How's the acting of Tough not different than the acting of Hiccup? How do we make sure that Hiccup is recognizable as a character from as a little boy to a 5-year-old to a 15-year-old? Like, how is that the same character? So we come up with a lot of acting principles and rules per character and define these characters very, very early on as we build these digital puppets. We build libraries, like expression libraries. Like Toothless, for example, had a good 50 different kinds of expressions that we could go to expressions that we knew worked. Because once you're in production, once the machine is running, once you're in shop production, you have to be efficient. And the first thing that suffers when you're under pressure is the quality of the look of the characters, the appeal, and that's why you have to do all this work up front. So halfway through production, now it's time to do shot work. And my job then becomes like, animation teams are structured. I'm the head of animation. We have 7 supervising animators who each are in charge of a character, and then they have teams that work with them on those characters. And the animators sort of like switch around a little bit because not every shot has just one character. Most shots have multiple characters. And my job in that process is I work with, I'm basically the right hand to Dean, who comes into animation dailies, tells us what the shots are about, tells us what he wants to see, and then reviews the shot. But his primary goal is to tell the story. So he will say, this works, I gets the idea across, and it's the characters that we recognize, and it moves the story forward. So his job essentially is tell the story right. My job becomes, how do we make this the most entertaining, the most fleshed out, the highest quality? So I'm essentially the one who always is on the lookout for how to make the scene entertaining and the best quality it can be. So I work with animators, I do rounds, I obviously also animate myself, because I think it's really important that if you're a creative leader, that you don't just talk about it, that you actually know what it means to pick up a stylus and animate the character and show that there's a certain way of doing it. And also like it otherwise you just become a talking head, and that can be really tricky.
Mm-hmm. For finding the entertainment and forgetting about the technical rules and stuff, how do you blend that when you're working with such complex things like flight like there's so much to like the level of animation that you're working with? How do you not think about that stuff?
That's the challenge. That's where experience comes in, of course, but I think the most important thing is you have to do the research up front. So you don't have to spend a lot of time learning to understand how certain things work. So for Dragons, we did this 2-week flight school, depending on whether they're new animators or animators that worked on the previous movies. And in flight school, that was basically structured into like a few days of theory, where you learn about aerodynamics, like Bernoulli's principle, which is the air that moves over a wing is less static than the air that moves under wing, because it has a longer path to travel, and fluid or moving air has less pressure than static air. So basically a wing pulls a character up, like stuff like that. Like you need to understand how that works, because the quintessential problem in animating flying characters is that, contrary to a walking character who contacts the ground and you understand how the ground works and you understand there's a force that pulls a character to the ground, here you can't see the force that a character is interacting with, which is air. And air has so many different qualities. Air can be turbulent, it can have an updraft, it can be it can come on. It can be there can be wind. There's small patterns, big patterns. There's general movements. You have to understand that, and in order to make it credible, you have to sell the presence of air. And then the additional problem, which is how do you sell weight in air, and how do you transition that weight from flight onto ground? So we have to really study this, and I think generally that's really important. If you want to caricature something, you have to understand how it works in nature in order to not create a cliche, because cliches are basically repeating something that somebody else has already said, right? And by virtue of repeating it, it becomes a cliche. It's not really true anymore. So caricature is important that it's grounded in reality. And so all these animators basically did simple, and the part that I didn't even talk about yet is the flapping of a wing. The wing beat itself is such a complex FK chain that you have to understand, because the sort of the default would be to do this, right? Just kind of a wave motion, but it's a really complex rotational movement. So understanding that was really important. So animators did a flap first. That was like a 3-day exercise, just a wing and doing a flap. Then the second exercise was flying statically, like along a helicopter. Basically, imagine if a helicopter would point the camera out of the helicopter and just film a dragon flying. And that was the exercise about sell air, like show me air even though I can't see it. And then the third exercise was a takeoff or a landing, where the character had to land or take off. And there are certain beats and sequences of locomotion that happen at every takeoff and every landing. And in order to do that right, you have to study it and then do it once. And once those animators were ready, you can also, it allowed us also to do one thing, which is you could kind of see who naturally is skilled at such complex mechanics, and animators who are not necessarily interested or excited about this. And we also then steered casting on the movie a little bit that way. So we put a lot of dragon experts, like Bill Diaz or Liron Topaz, who did amazing dragon stuff, towards those shots, and others we kept them more on the human performances.
That like training process and like learning all that, but then trying to be entertaining once that's understood. How often would you break rules or like allow we're gonna forget about, like, did you ever have to?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I mean, generally, I think animation is generally like this. Like, there's no hard and fast rule on how to do something. If it works, by God, like, have the character fly backwards if it works, if it's entertaining. So these principles and all these things that you learn, you use them when it doesn't work. Like, it's sort of their fallback rules. So I think an animator should follow its instinct. If you have something that you visualize in your head, and you believe that this is something that's going to really work, you have to do it. You have to get it out of the system. So ultimately, my job is that sitting in front of a piece of animation, whether it's blocked or finished, and I follow my gut instinct and maybe my experience as an animator, and I tell myself that's working or that's not working, or it's working but I think it could be better. And that's where you have to be as a sort of supervising animator and head of animation. I think the most important thing is you have to know pretty quickly what are the 2 or 3 most important things that would make this better. I think the worst thing a supervising animator can do is let me just start throwing all the things at you that come through my mind, starting with, I exaggerate, that pinky here has a spacing problem. Like that's the wrong way to go about it. Because you have to always think of, you have to take it in the pyramid approach, right? You have to start with the foundation, give the big notes first. Don't worry about all this other stuff. You will have a chance to say those things later. And if you don't have a chance, it most likely didn't matter. And every time I have this experience, every time I watch a movie finished on screen, finally lit with the effects and everything, and I look at it and I go like, there's a lot of things in here that I worried about that in the context of the movie do not matter. That's not to say you shouldn't try and aim for the best version possible, but in order to be a good creative leader, you also have to keep in mind in the back of your head, if you're aiming for perfection, you're probably going to clip this animator's wings. You're going to make him feel like he's not really owning the shot. And you have to know that as long as I can get it into the ballpark, it's going to be great. I just have to make sure that those big things that will get it into the ballpark are being said, not the little things that will probably matter only to experts. That's another thing. I think you should forget about how your peers will look at your animation. You should think about, how will my 10-year-old son or my mother see this, and will they be entertained by it? We sometimes waste so much time on things that are essentially technicalities. So I think those things are really important to keep in mind. And I think also to just come back to, how do you make a shot entertaining? I think there's a way to go about this, which is listen to the line of dialogue or watch your scene layout and turn the sound off and just think about what's the most obvious choice here. Like, what comes to mind? Write it down, do a couple of drawings, act it out if you will, fold it up, put it aside, and then say, okay, now I'm going to give me 10 other versions, 10 other options for this shot. What else could it be? Could he walk? Could he do a somersault? Could he and you have to kind of force yourself. You have to crack that nut. You have to force yourself to say, what's the craziest version of this shot? What's the version that will never be approved? And you have to go to those places and then slowly come back, because only then do you realize that your original idea is either absolutely right, there's no other version, or, oh my God, I didn't think about how retained and simplistic that original idea was. It's too obvious. I think we artists have to challenge ourselves to give the viewer something that they didn't expect. Robert McKee said in his storybook, which I think is something really great, give the audience what they want, but not how they expect it. I think that's a really important thing. So that's how you find, what is essential about the scene, and not be bogged down with technicalities.
Yeah. That's awesome. I like the 10 ideas, make it happen, like forcing creativity.
Yeah, unless you have found those 10 ideas, don't even go into blocking. Leave it. Like, force yourself, and even if you get into writer's block, and you can't find those ideas, find somebody to give you an idea. Ask other people how they would do the scene. That's something that I think we also get stuck in all the time. Is I think we're too focused on our own egos, like, I want to come up with the idea that's going to make this shot great, so that at the premiere I can tell myself that was my idea, even though that's a very satisfying feeling. Even if you did a shot that none of the ideas were from you and you found them all from your friends, you are the shepherd of that shot. You are the person who made that happen. I think we are in a team sport, and we have to make sure that we use all the resources that are there. Don't limit yourself by your ego. I mean, there's so many things that I've done, some of the best work that I've done, they're ultimately not a combination of other people's ideas. I think that you have to just embrace that, unless you're a genius, which I'm not.
And for people who like when you're not at the studio and you don't have a regular core group of people that you trust and whatever, what are some things that come to mind? Like when you were a student, if you had to follow the same kind of ideas, like what would you have done now, I guess, with different tools, but like how would you kind of get that feedback and use that for growth?
I mean, there's inspiration all around us all the time. I mean, there's so many ways to go about finding the right idea, if that's what you're asking. I mean, obviously your schoolmates, like, just because somebody's not necessarily a great animator doesn't mean they don't have great ideas. So you have to find people that you trust, and you have to kind of get out of your shell and share those ideas, share your ideas, even if they're not good. You got to get them out of the system. So I realized that pretty quickly. For example, when I was the Gobelin, I had 2 or 3 go-to friends that I said, what do you think of this? How do you feel about that? And but I remember I was also oftentimes I was just held back by the fact, even though that I think that's a feeling to harness. Like I always wanted to impress with my scenes. I wanted to, okay, I'm going to blow these people away with what I'm going to do now. Mm-hmm. That's a really good feeling to have. That's like that. If that's what drives your engine, what makes you work an hour longer, or wake up in the middle of the night to do something, that's an excitement. That's a positive feeling, right? It's like, oh my God, I have this idea and I'm not going to tell anybody about it. You can do that. I mean, maybe that's another idea you just fold up, but to ask other people about ideas or find more ideas than that. And even if deep inside, that's the thing. If you have that feeling, if you feel that feeling, that nugget, I mean, I generally feel that every scene you should get that feeling at some point. You go like, oh, that half blink or that slight cocking of the head is what's going to make this so special. You have to do it. At least you have to try it out. I think if you're going into a shot uninspired and you don't quite know how it's going to be, it's probably not going to be a great scene, and probably everybody's going to be able to see it. So you have to force yourself to get to that point where that feeling is coming up, where you go like, oh, this is gonna be so sweet. And I the last resort, which should also be the first resort, is pop in the Jungle Book or watch any animated movie where Milt Call or any of the 9 Old Men have animated on. You're gonna get some ideas, on how to make this just pop off the screen.
Awesome. I feel like there's not a lot of information about like how to animate dragons or flight, and like you've talked a little bit about some of the mechanics that go into like learning it. Do you have any stuff you want to share to people who are animating flying creatures?
Yeah.
You have such a wealth of knowledge on the
topic.
topic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's basically a way to go about it, right? The first problem you have to solve, you could basically take a ball, maybe stick two flat shapes in the side, and you don't even have to worry about your character yet, and just find your path and make it feel like it's not on a rail. It's not like air doesn't function like ground or water. I mean, maybe more like water, but it's even less reactive than that. So if you move your character through space, don't think of it as something that's sliding through space. It's drifting and skidding and turning. There is a moment of a delay between, for example, if a dragon banks, before that takes effect, and it might be a frame, might be 2 frames, but everything's a little sluggish. Everything is a little bit delayed. So that's problem number one. How does this volume, with weight that's pulled by gravity and pulled up by lift, how is that volume moving through this liquid? Essentially, it's gas, right? So but you can treat it like a liquid. And how dense is that liquid? So that's problem number one. That's the first thing you have to solve. And the second thing you have to solve is a dragon or a flying creature is actively doing something to move up, move down, fly faster or fly slower. So you have to think about how that cause and effect works. So if a dragon flaps its wings down, probably a little past the halfway mark, maybe down here, and the wings are down here, the body will lift up. But pretty quickly we'll have the counter reaction, which is the upbeat will push the body back down, right? But generally when a beat is strong, there is 2/3 up, and then it comes 100% up, and then maybe 50% back down. So it's generally rising, right? Unless it's a slow flap, then it's just kind of an up and down. So you have to deal with, that's just the flapping. But then it's also, each wing has an angle of attack, which means if this wing gets tilted up, that wing gets lifted, right? If the wing gets tilted down, that wing gets pulled down. So this banking is something that you have, that is actively controlled by a wing. So okay, now that the dragon or the bird or whatever it is actively pushing himself through this liquid that we talked about earlier. And then the next thing is how to make it entertaining. Like, it's just like there's flourish, there's rhythm, there's like you can go flap, 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 dive, flap. There could be a timing to it that makes it interesting. If it's just flap, flap, dive, time, it's just boring. So just the general, things that you do with every animated scene, which is give it rhythm, give it a flourish, find something that's fun. Do something surprising. What if your bird all of a sudden does a 360, barrel roll, or so you find those ideas on top of that. And something really important to know also is it's not just the wings that drive how a bird flies, or a dragon. It's the tail, it's the angle of the head, it's the body position. A bird flaps differently when he's sort of flying statically at a 45-degree body angle. The flaps then all of a sudden are more forward, so the direction of the flap changes. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
But I think you have to do it. You have to go about it. Solve one problem at a time. Start with something simple and approach more difficult subject. Most importantly, I think don't animate a flying creature unless you've at least freeze framed through some great eagle footage or cranes or whatever creature that is out there. Is that me?
No, that's me. It's this one.
Okay. I thought it was like, do I have something in here?
I didn't recognize it at all. I was like, was that one of my things? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you have to do some study in real life. Just freeze frame through it. You'll understand so much visually, so much faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
And specifically live action reference, not necessarily animated flight reference.
I mean, I always start with live action, real life, nature, or humans, or I observe again, because I think otherwise you do a caricature of the caricature and you very likely going to copy things that are essentially off or weird or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important.
One last thing I forgot to ask you: how has your 2D experience helped you through everything? Do you still use drawing and so on? Because people always say, "Do I need to know drawing? What if I can't draw to be an animator now?" So on and so on. But you've done both, so I feel like you have a lot of potential things here.
I mean, I certainly don't think you need it. I think you can be a great computer animator and never having drawn a line. I think you have to have an eye. You have to develop an eye for. But like there's sculptors that have never drawn, and they're amazing sculptors. There's stop motion animators that are not great draftsmen. They're amazing stop motion artists. I certainly think it helps. Like it helped me, but where it helps mostly is in learning to be. What's an appealing drawing? Like what makes a character's eyes appealing? Like what's an appealing shape? Like how does a mouth shape be simplified and more stylized? And then screen compositions. I mean, by drawing you're forced to learn those things. I don't think it's absolutely a necessity, but it helped me a great deal because obviously as a supervising animator or as a Hoka, you do a lot of draw overs. I do a lot of draw or even paint overs where I actually paint over so that I use the color of what's on the image and not just a red line that sometimes you can't quite tell, is it really better? But when you paint over, you really can tell this is before, this is after. It's exactly the same colors. This clearly looks better. Mm-hmm. So it's helped me a great deal. So I would highly recommend, if you have some interest in drawing and some drawing skills, to do at least spend some time doing life drawings. I think that's really life drawing helps you understand proportion and gesture and breaking angles, three-dimensionality. It helps you understand a lot of things, but I don't think it's a necessity.
Just another tool.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely see that 2D animators have a slightly different way of looking at an image, at a pose, and but I mean, we have some great animators at DreamWorks that are not necessarily great draftsmen that see what's appealing and what's not appealing. I don't think it's a requirement, but it's certainly a great tool. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we have questions here from a bunch of people.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious.
And if you want to submit questions for future interviews, go to the links in the description. I'll have details there. But yeah, that's a thing now.
Okay.
It's the first time we've done sourced questions. How do you keep creativity really active when you're working in the same environment, same studio for years on the same project? How do you keep having new ideas, motivating yourself and your team, and how does that feel on a regular basis?
I've never had a problem with being motivated to be creative, because I lose myself in my work very quickly. And I've had many experiences where I worked on not so great movie, but the scene itself is still interesting. Like I think you can make almost any kind of scene interesting for yourself. I know this sounds maybe, a lot of people go, if you worked on the shot that I'm working on right now, your brain would be imploding. I get that, and I've had that too. But there's always something that I think you can challenge yourself with, and sometimes it is about getting it done. Mm-hmm. That, like, create yourself a little schedule of how to go about this shot and get through it. And I mean, there's moments where you may not be inspired because you're just doing something that's kind of grinding. But in general, I always feel like there's something to be found that's interesting. And if you really find yourself incapable of getting motivated, then I think it's time to get out. It's time to go find something else. Like, I really believe that, and that nobody will ever tell you that. Like, no supervising animator or Hoka or director will ever tell you, no, it's really time for you to go find something else because I don't think you're inspired. Nobody will ever tell you that. Everybody will always. That's corporate America, and I think it's good that everybody generally will try and encourage you to find a way to be helpful to the project and tell you that they believe in you, that you're going to get there, because there is most likely always a way. And it's not a supervisor's job to tell you, you know what, there's really no way for you to get motivated. It's really something you have to find in yourself. And then I think when you're out there, you're going to realize very quickly there's a lot of other places to go that may not have the same kind of status or the same kind of salary, but there's things that are really interesting there. And I think it's really important for you to be creatively inspired. Like, animation's too hard and too time consuming to do something that's just a job. Like, it just cannot be just a job. It just can't. I believe that very, very strongly, that unless you're inspired, unless you're having, it's not even having fun, but you're enjoying getting to the result, and then when you see it, you go like, okay, I've achieved something here that I'm proud of. If you cannot get that feeling over a certain amount of time, I mean, not every shot will give you that, but generally that's the feeling you have to achieve. So for me, it's always, I find something that I can caricature. I find something, I find inspiration in real life. And if I have something that's really grinding, I generally do something on the side. I try and, fill a sketchbook, or do a design of a character, or plan ahead of what I could do next after this movie. What could I do next? Would it be great to do some storyboarding, which I did. I went from animation to supervising to storyboarding, and I did some character design, like trying to sort of bring your own skill level up. That's also something that could be incredibly inspiring, that can get you through some, less inspiring times.
I've never heard that before. That's good advice. I like that.
I think it's important. I think it's really key that you challenge yourself and move yourself forward creatively and in terms of skills by finding things you're interested in but you're not doing yet. Sometimes it's learning a program, it's learning a certain software, and you'll find some creative satisfaction in there. But it's important that you recognize yourself. Only you yourself will recognize whether you're stuck in some kind of a loop that you can't get out.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You talked a little bit earlier, this actually works with this, about being the client for the modelers and riggers and things like that. What are some really important things that you need to have in the model or in the rig?
That's a tough question, but I think if your original design at the base is appealing, your job is to maintain that appeal, actually improve it. So you have to find a way to make it better from what you have, even if the source at the beginning is amazing. Then it's about not losing it, and as it goes into 3D, it'll be incredible. And so the first most important thing, you have to have appeal. The character has to be appealing. And, Simpson characters can be really appealing, even though or maybe Beavis and Butthead is a better example. Like, deliberately unappealing characters are appealing too, or villains can be appealing. Appeal is maybe sometimes interpreted, it's not just the Disney princess appeal, it's appealing can be a word that like you have to love, like it has to be just something you want to look at. That's key number one. And then in the model, of course, topology becomes really important because you want to be able to hit all those expressions, and if the topology is not there to get you those shapes, you got to go back and fix the topology. It's not always possible, but I generally spend quite a bit of time with the team and just discussing, like, is this the right topology? And I don't know enough about topology, but I asked questions about that. Can you achieve these kinds of shapes that I'm aiming for? So then you want some kind of fleshiness, you want to be able to create those shapes, and you want to create movement. I think the model and the rig should allow you to, if you move controls, there should be chain reactions. Like, you want to have things push other things, and you don't want a lot of dead zones. So things should, like, if this area here does never move in the rig, when you smile, then it just becomes really stiff, and that's really hard for an animator to break. So a rig and the model should really give you a chance as an animator to push things around, all the while maintaining volume and design. So you shouldn't be able to just randomly push things around and then the design can be just something completely different. Although there are characters where you want that, if a character is kind of morphing, or it's sort of the Grinch, who also has this giant mouth. If that's part of the fun, then that should be there too. But so you want to have a character that has that is fleshy, it doesn't lose the design, that doesn't have a lot of dead zones, and that's how I approach it. Is generally make sure those things carry through. And of course, there's a lot of like rules that I gave myself. For example, if the fingers are too skinny and you can't do a fist, and you always see gaps between the fingers, you can never do a good fist. So there's things like that. There's hundreds of little things like that I've personally accumulated over the years, of things that I saw on the animation side. It's like, I wish I was able to do this fist, and I can't do it. I can't close these gaps. It never looks like a real fist. That's a very common example that happens often. So you have to kind of look out for those things as you go through the process. You have to kind of know what problems could arise at the end of the journey. And for those who haven't gone through this process, I think the way to go about this is watch animated movies, and watch good animated movies. Watch your Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, Sony, Blue Sky movies. But also watch some lesser movies, student films, and see what the difference is. Like, how did they solve it, and how did the student film solve it? And you can kind of see, okay, they did some things here to achieve this that this student film doesn't have. Like, pin necks are really problematic, for example. Like, really skinny necks, really long skinny necks, they become like, all of a sudden, like, the shoulders don't interact with the head, and you can't do certain things. You can't, like, if you can't do this with a character, that's incredibly limited for an animator, like limiting for an animator. Or, for example, the length of a lower leg to an upper leg. If you can't just translate your character down and a character sits on its heels, a human character, you're going to have a problem, because a lot of the reference that you're going to shoot for your scene, you're going to have to kind of cheat your way around it to achieve it. So make animators' lives easier as you build the characters. I could talk about this for hours. I have so many things. Do's and don'ts about rigging.
We'll get that in another video.
Yeah, exactly.
What advice would you give students coming right out of school that are trying to get a job? And I think we could break up into like, what would you tell students whose reels maybe aren't there yet, and then some who they're very close?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the number one thing that studios are looking for, and it depends a little bit on the studio. Obviously, if you're doing an advertising company or so, it's different than a big giant feature studio. But I can only speak for the feature studios. Number one we're looking out for is what's this animator's potential for being a great actor and performer and a person who can find really surprising ideas. So then the second thing is, does he or she understand the principles of animation? Is it technically on a level where we could put this animator on a scene? Or does this animator need to go through some more training? That depends a little bit on what the studio is looking for in terms of hiring. But number one advice I have, if don't just focus on being technically good, focus on doing something that's entertaining. Even if it's just a really tiny little scene, start small. A fun walk cycle. That don't just do a generic walk cycle. Find a walk cycle that has character. Like go out and look at different people and watch. Spend 10 minutes or 30 minutes at the bus stop or the train station and watch people walk and find like, okay, that's the most entertaining walk. I'm going to do that walk in my shot. That's important. So then the same goes for a little performance. You can take a 3-second Jim Carrey clip and do something really entertaining, really funny with a mediocre rig, and it's entertaining. So you show the people who are watching these later that you want to be entertaining. You don't want to just be hyper realistic. Of course, if you want to go into visual effects and you want to do creature animation, then of course you should do that. So that's, I guess, another advice is compare yourself to what those people do in the positions that you want to be in, and try and slowly approach yourself to that. Nobody's expecting you to do a 30-second scrat, an entertaining piece of animation. That would be insane, because if you were able to do that, you'd be hired already. You don't need to do this, go through your school. So I think that's kind of the key thing. And then people who are really close, I guess, just be persistent but not annoying. Mm-hmm. Like there's some people who kind of cross the line of how often they send their reel and how many times they write you an email about, please look at my reel. You just have to you have to be somebody that even the recruiters want to hire, like somebody who's a person that people want to work with and want to collaborate with. So if you're too persistent, that's also not great. So but be persistent. Like go to the studio, hit them up, send your reel, update your reel. Once your reel's done and you submitted it, keep going to your next test or your next short film. Keep working, update the reel regularly, and resubmit it when it's updated. And I think one lesson that I learned that I think is really important. I was graduating right when Pixar was working on Toy Story 1, and for me that wasn't even an option because I was training to be a 2D animator, to do computer animation. And that happened multiple times in my career where I was just sort of kind of blind to all the other opportunities that are out there because I have a certain idea set in my mind. I really want to work at DreamWorks or Pixar. Don't do that. Like, look at all the opportunities that are there, and you are going to find things that you're going to like. And maybe there is a couple of detours, and eventually, if you're good at what you do and you keep working at it, you're going to end up in a place where you're really happy. But if you're just set on, I must be a wet digital animator and do work on these high-end visual effects movies, but you're not quite there yet, you're gonna lose a lot of time. Whereas you could have just done this amazing commercial and then go to this visual effects movie in France, and from there go to the next thing. Like, keep your eye open for all these opportunities that are out there. Don't just lock yourself into one path.
A lot of people ask about the major few studios, and like that's kind of the laser focus. But that's not all there is, and like there's other things, and then B, like once you get there, you're not done. Like there's still other things you might want to do. So like,
Right.
what do you think about?
I think that's really important. Like statistically speaking, the greater you that are out there trying to become animators, there's only a certain amount of people that are going to find these jobs, are going to get into those studios. And I'm sure there's a lot out there that will, but not everybody will. So you have to be honest with yourself. Like, yes, everybody says if you have good friends, they'll tell you truthfully what they think of your work. But nobody's out there to crush somebody or say, like, you will never make it. And of course, nobody knows whether or not you will ever make it, because you have not evolved and you have not had the chance maybe to get the right training, and maybe there's a talent inside of you that gets there. And of course, that's entirely possible, and also maybe highly likely that the talent is in you. But I think if you set your goals too limited, and you kind of narrow your search only for those things, you could possibly be stuck in situations that you don't want to be in, or you are closing, your viewpoint to other opportunities. And like from my perspective, how I analyze the industry, of course, there's a lot of people who want to do animation. I mean, a lot of studios, from the big studios to the smaller production houses, who all want to create their own IP and make their own movies and series. And there's a lot of players out there that probably the world hasn't even heard of yet, that possibly will become really successful. Probably not all of them, but there will be some. So you might be approached by studios that are going to be incredibly successful, and you dismiss it for I've never heard of this studio, and then also one thing that's incredibly encouraging for animators per se, animation is exploding into other territories, from VR to AR to gaming to animated series, and by series I mean assistants. There's going to be there's so much animation that's going to be needed out there, that there's not possibly enough qualified talent out there to fill all those positions. But if everybody wants to be a Pixar animator and nothing else, all these jobs will go to people who are probably not as talented. And so I think you really have to look at the market with an open eyes, because I'm sure there are some big companies out there that are pursuing what the next type of entertainment is, and there's going to be some really exciting things, and we're all going to go, oh my god, why did I not get in on this early on when it was... I mean, just think about app development on the smartphones. Mm-hmm. I remember the first app I saw, I think, was somebody who designed a beer drinking app, and all he could do is tilt liquid that looked like beer. And I think that person, whoever developed this, made a ton of money, and now app development is one of the biggest businesses out there, in terms of digital new businesses. And so actually it's already old, and so there's going to be a lot of new things that animators are going to be needed. So we have to be really open to those possibilities. And I truly believe that it's really important that animators and artists are stay honest with yourself. Like, ask yourself, how does it compare to the best out there? I think a big mistake that a lot of people make, and even within the companies, when they want to get promoted or they're asking for a chance to be a supervisor or a character lead or something, they compare themselves with the lower level talent in those positions, rather than comparing themselves to the top talent in those positions. Because I think in order to be moving up in the industry, you have to compare yourself to the best, and you have to be honest with yourself. Am I there or am I not there? If you feel like you're there but you don't get the opportunity, then go somewhere else if you're not getting the opportunity. I think that's really important to be true to be honest with yourself about that, but also don't let it crush you if you feel like you're not there. because again, you don't know, like all of a sudden something clicks and some opportunity gets opened up, and some aspect of this craft that you're really good at that others aren't good at, and you get an opportunity. And I believe strongly that positivity floats up. Like being an optimist and positive and believe in your evolution and your ability to get better, along with having open eyes to what else is out there, you are going to find a great path, and you're going to be really satisfied with where that's going.
Awesome. I like that. How fast do animators need to work on productions that allow them to build enough time to still polish, do the planning? What's the timeline look like?
I think it varies a little bit from studio to studio. On How to Train Your Dragon 3, the animators did about 5.5 feet in average per week. So that considering some of the complex shots we had in the movie where you had 15 dragons in a shot, where maybe an animator would do that at 2 or 3 feet a week, to some of the senior animators who would go 10, 15 feet a week. So I think in average you should do about, if a 5-second shot should take you about a week. But of course, if you have a 15-second shot, that should take you 3 weeks. So like the shorter the shot, the harder it gets to hit. It is to hit those numbers. But as a student, I wouldn't concern myself too much with that. I would just focus on quality and focus on being efficient and moving forward. I think the best animators, the most effective animators, are the ones that they come up with an idea, they think about it long and hard. What is the version that I want to do? Then they sit down and they block through the shot without stopping. They don't second guess themselves. They just do it. Then they take a moment, they look at it, they go have a coffee, they look at it a few times, and then go, all right, I'm going to fix these 5 things. They go and do it. Some people, like I created lists for myself. I looked at my shot. It took half an hour at a 70-80% shot, and I create lists of all the things I want to fix. And then I go down the list and do not look at the shot. Because this is a big difference between 2D animation and computer animation. Because you can play all the time, you can watch it all the time and loop it over and over, to the point where now you're desensitized to what the shot actually looks like. You don't even see it anymore, and you start looking at all the things that could be wrong that nobody ever sees. So you have to make sure that you prioritize the most important things, and that when you sit down and work, you sit down and work. Don't be distracted. Like procrastination is a really dangerous thing for an animator. But yeah, generally I'd say 5 feet a week, 5 seconds a week with a single character or 2 characters is sort of the goal. But I know that on certain movies that came out recently, they did less footage because maybe the technique was a little bit different, and other studios go a little slower and others go a little faster. So it depends.
And for those who don't know, a feet, or the amount of feet,
Yeah.
what those?
A foot is 16 frames, so
Okay.
it's basically 2/3 of a second.
Gotcha. Animation is hard and mentally and cognitive intense. What are some tips to maintain focus, not procrastinate, and just stay in the zone?
It's a challenge. I mean, everybody's challenged with that. Some less, some others more. But you have to have a rhythm. You have to force yourself into this. And some do it by blocking time. Say, okay, these 2 hours, I'm not going to walk away from my desk. Then I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to work again. I think one thing really important, really great advice is, do not check your emails, or give yourself specific hours when you check your emails. Before 9, before lunch, at 3:30, and at the end of the day. Do not look at your email. Do not go online. Put that stuff away. Then some people need music to be in a bubble. I always want to be in a bubble, so I put on music, headphones, and I play it quite loud so that I stay in that zone and I'm enjoying myself. I'm enjoying, like I don't feel like I need anything. Others put on a show or something that keeps their brain entertained. Milt Kahl said people who are animating with music I can't remember what word he used, but something pretty bad. Like he needed silence. I think it depends on the person. I think, I definitely think, a good music score, a score of a good film that will get you in the zone. But I think you have to give yourself goals. By this time, I will have achieved this. I will have blocked to frame 240. And you really hit that. You try and really hit that. Even if I think the biggest enemy in getting stuff done is perfection. Like trying to make everything perfect and second guess everything. Do that at the end. Fix it at the end. And I think, and you told me you have some workflow videos. Stick with the workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to have a workflow. I'm going to think about my shot, shoot reference, do some drawings. Once I have that, I block through my shots on 8s or something, or I just do the body blocking or whatever, whether you're layered or pose to pose, or some people just do, like, I'm going to do first some drawings directly on the computer and I'm going to hit those poses. And define the moments when you say, now I'm going to edit what I did. You have to separate editing and improving what you have and going through and doing something. Those are two separate processes. And when you start mixing those things up, you meander and you start spending a lot of time. And I think the other thing, particularly if you're, obviously if you're layered animator, you have to go from the inside out and you have to layer from the beginning. But don't spend too much time perfecting curves. And then also don't spline your shot too soon. Because if you spline your shot too soon, you're going to get lost in the fact that something doesn't move properly. So keep your keys on the same frames. Don't offset too soon. But also not too long. Obviously, you can also be in blocking mode for too long, and you try and make your perfect blocking, and then you put it in spline, and you go like, oh my god, that's not at all what I wanted. So what I do is I shoot reference and do drawings at the same time. First thing I do when I get a shot is I open the shot, I put one pose in just so I understand the lens effect on the character and what compositionally is there. From there, I do my reference or my drawings, generally both. Once I have that, I block through my shot without looking at it, in steps, the least amount of poses I need to tell the story, and I then spline and then turn it to spline just to see how it moves. Are there any errant keys or weird, gimbals or whatever it might be, whatever it could be? You want to know what it is, what it looks like, but don't do anything about it. Then break down more keys, go on 4s, on 8s, whatever, however you want to go about it. If you have reference and you sort of match reference, to do that. But then once you're through the process again, look at it again, it's blind, but don't do anything about it too soon. So you kind of go back and forth.
Cool.
And then polish up the shot.
Okay. What was your most troublesome shot through the entire Dragons franchise, and the one that you enjoyed the most? And why?
The hardest shot I think I did was the shot in Dragons 2 where Hiccup and Toothless face Cloud Jumper and the mother for the first time, and she flies around them and then Cloud Jumper opens up the double wings for the first time. It's the reveal that it's actually not just a two-winged dragon, but a 4-winged dragon. And there's a section in there where I basically had to match the top wing to the bottom wing and make it feel like one wing, whereas they're really two, and then have it feel like and read as the second wing separates. I think that was probably the technically most challenging shots because of that. And complex flight, complex camera. Actually, no, sorry, there's one more that was harder. And that was in Dragons 1. There's a shot where Astrid falls from being just saved from being sort of sucked back into the Red Death's mouth. She falls down, Toothless comes in, swoops her up, catches her. He looks back, she sees her smiling. And then there's a shot, which is the really tricky one, where he flies at full speed and then drops her off. She runs to a stop. The camera pushes in the back of the head, and he flies away and back to attacking the Red Death, and finally sort of luring him away from the island.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably even harder because one of the hardest parts about flying shots is the camera is its own thing. Like, it dictates the spacing of your character, and the camera went from full speed to a slowed down speed on the ground. So essentially, the character gets separated from the camera. All those shots on the entire franchise were probably the hardest shots to do because you really frame by frame spacing, and of course all the parenting. Like, he flips her upside down, holds her on, from the hand to the feet to the putting her on the ground, and that change was really tricky. But to be fair, none of these shots, the hardest shots that I've done, are anywhere near as hard as some of the shots that the guys did in Dragons 3. Like, Liron Topaz did a shot at the end of Dragons 3 that you'll hopefully see, which is, I shouldn't give too much away, but it's basically Toothless flying around the Light Fury and then passing back and forth characters.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know which shot I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think I do.
I mean, it's insanely complicated. And like Liron and Bill Diaz and a few people, Dane Starkner and Thomas Grumt, those guys have done such complex shots, like the Bewilderbeast fight, the big battle, the attacking the battle with the camera flying behind the dragons. That was Liron's. I mean, I'm probably not doing justice because there's a lot of other people who really did difficult shots. So my shots were nothing compared to those shots. Nothing. There's some real, like, some people did some magic to get the shots even done, to even get the shots in the can. When we saw some of those shots in previews, we went like, this is ridiculous. Like, no animator should have to go through this. This is so challenging.
Like a little dragons therapy group.
completely. I think we're gonna have battle scars from this for years to come.
How about the one you're most, like, you enjoyed the most, you're most proud of, like the happiest one across the movies?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, anytime I was able to animate Toothless, I really, really had a great time. I think one of the shots that I really love, that makes me laugh every time I see it, there's a shot, and maybe it's also because I suggested this idea to Dean as we were driving to a lunch, and it's the shot of in Dragons 2, there's a shot where Toothless... Sorry, there's two. I should say two. The first one is there's a shot where Toothless looks at Cloud Jumper, who just stole a fish from him, and he looks at him longingly, and then Cloud Jumper barfs up a fish, and Toothless eats it, like, excitedly. Mm-hmm. That was a shot that I really, really enjoyed. And that's the one there where I suggested this idea to Dean, and he was like, that sounds great, let's do it. And in Dragons 3, the shot... I think there's two shots that get a really big laugh. That is actually in the trailer. Dane did this amazing shot of the big mating dance shot where he sort of pops his head out and he does this weird... Yeah. And that's a really amazing shot, and I think that's probably the most beloved shot in Dragons 3 that he did. And I had the chance to do the shot right before where Hiccup tells Toothless how to do the chicken dance, and Toothless then does it and walks around the Light Fury. Yeah. I did that shot. That was so much fun to do. It's just like, it's the best feeling when you do a shot and then every time you hit play you have to chuckle when you know, like, this is really cute and really entertaining. It's sort of surreal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are sort of my highlights. I mean, there's many more, but. If you force me to pick two, let's say those.
Okay. This should be making everyone want to go back and rewatch all these movies.
Yes, please. Maybe people haven't even seen it yet.
Yeah.
Or maybe by the time this video comes out, it'll be out. Okay.
I think Dragons 3 will be out by the time I release this. So if you haven't seen it, go. If you were looking and reviewing people's work and people were animating dragons and you were looking at it for hiring, what would you be looking for that you want to make sure they get right?
In Dragonflight.
Yeah. Or in any other animation, if you have anything in particular.
I mean, like I said, the first thing I look out for is like, is this animator? Does this animator have a sense of entertainment? Can he entertain? Can he make something believable and credible? But also, is there spark in it? Is there something that's a little unexpected? Or, I mean, generally, you go, people we must hire this guy. Is people who go like, how did he do that? I honestly, how did he go about this? Like, what brought him to this idea, and how did he or she find this idea? And that happens all the time. You go like, that's really out of left field, and I love it. This is really cool. That's generally a great indicator that this person will do very well at a big studio. So that may be the first thing. Again, we hired some people for Dragons specifically that we felt like could handle the complexity of some of those shots that are almost visual effects shots, like really complex creature shots. So we definitely did look at, as well as, is this person capable of handling some really challenging technical shots? And so, but there's always a variety of people that get hired, and people get hired for different strengths. But I would say number one is, does this person entertain me? Like, is it entertaining?
Cool. And is there any common flight animation mistakes that you see that you would warn people not to do or to learn more about so that they don't?
I mean, in flight school, there's an entire hour where I talk about examples of things not to do. Number one is, and that is generally not the animator's fault, is birds or dragons cannot take off straight up. They have to have thrust. There has to be airflow over the wings before they can actually lift off. That's why planes have to speed before they take off. Now, of course, a bird or a dragon can jump and then create some airflow over the wings, but that's problem number one. Second problem is the character's not flying through air; it's flying through water or some other weird liquid. So it's all like in path and on tracks. And then the third biggest mistake is the way a flap works. I mean, not to say you can't do something really silly and completely ridiculous and it makes you laugh, which is great. Like, I always love what they did in Horton Hears a Who, that there's a character, I can't remember his name, the vulture character, like, it's totally ridiculous, and it completely works because it's entertaining. Mm-hmm. So again, entertaining is more important than believability. It depends a little bit on the show, on the style of the show, but yeah, so I think those are the three big mistakes.
One that I remember you talking about, because you guys are doing like drawovers and all this stuff, that I wanted to point out was the having air in the wings, like having flat wings that like they'll bend or twist and it looks just like a flat simulated paper thingy.
Yeah.
So do you do like, I don't know, drawing passes? Like, are there anything that you would, if you were...
I mean, that's probably the number one drawover drawing that I did, which is the shape of the wing has to be slightly curved. From a profile, right? So this is called the airfoil, which creates that lift. But even a wing from a side, it's not a flat thing. It's under pressure. It's under pressure from below. It's under pressure through the airfoil. It's naturally anatomically curved in order to create lift. So that's like and then of course the tip of the feathers, there's air pressure pushing them up. So there's this S shape in a wing, both from side view and from the front view. Yeah, so what a wing shape looks like is something that I did a lot of drawings for. But it's also part of flight school, and so most animators immediately understood the problem that a flat wing shape poses, and it's not dynamic, right? So shapes generally, you have to look for, if anything is under a certain kind of pressure, whether it's gravity or air pressure or water pressure, shapes become dynamic. They're hardly ever flat or straight, or there's certain curvature to it.
Cool. That is all the questions I have.
Cool.
Is there any final word you want to leave people with?
I mean, I would say thank you for going to see How to Train Your Dragon 3: The Hidden World. I take it that you will, or I trust that you will. You won't be disappointed. And then for all you animators out there, I would just say it's a craft that always evolves, and what makes this job great is that you never stop learning. You go from animating rats in the sewers of London to animating horses in the American wilderness, to animating dragons, or fluffy animals, whatever you will be. There's always something new, and there's always something to learn. And when you work in a studio, whether it's a big studio or a small studio, you're always exposed to people who come from different backgrounds and different skill sets. So what's amazing about animation is you're always exposed to something different. You learn something that you didn't know before, and that's something I embrace. That's something I love, and I'm sure you love it too. And so don't ever think you need to be at a point where, now I learned it, now I'm good enough to do this job. That just never happens, and that's what makes it great. So I hope you enjoy learning, and I hope I can learn something from you when your project comes out, because I'm going to be the first one freeze framing through your animation and go like, how on earth did he or she do that? That's pretty impressive. So I'm looking forward to seeing your work.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Simon, for being on the show.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you guys next time.